Hey guys, how's it going? This is Waj, and in this video we're doing a full hands-on comparison between the all-new BlackBerry Passport that just came out and the Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, these are two completely different smartphones. They're running different operating systems, they're different form factors, and between all these differences, there are some overlapping features that make each phone unique in their own respect. Now, if you're interested in getting either of these phones or just want to know how these two different smartphones compare against each other, all things considered, definitely stay tuned and we'll find out which phone is the best. Now, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the overall physical differences between these two smartphones. Now, on the left-hand side, the Samsung Galaxy S5 measures about 142 millimeters in terms of its height and about 72.5 millimeters in terms of its width. The BlackBerry Passport measures 128 millimeters in terms of its height and about 90.3 millimeters in terms of its width. In terms of thickness, the Samsung is a tiny bit thicker, measuring about 8.1 millimeters versus the Passport measuring 9.3 millimeters. Moving on to weight, the BlackBerry is certainly the heavier device, measuring about 194 grams versus the S5 only measuring about 145 grams. Now, aside from the footprint differences, which you can see are quite drastic, and they're really quite the opposite spectrum in terms of design and form factor, looking at the overall ergonomics, obviously the BlackBerry has a unique kind of shape that makes it kind of interesting to hold in the hand. Obviously, it's a little bit awkward if you have smaller hands, and obviously reaching some of the buttons can certainly be a stretch if you're not a hand gymnast. But overall, the feel and ergonomics of it in the hand really feels solid. It has a rubberized back, and it's made of really high quality plastic, polycarbonate plastics with a metal band around it, which kind of gives it a nice premium look. The Samsung Galaxy S5 is also made out of polycarbonate plastic, and it definitely has a overall more plasticier feel. It's obviously lighter, which is a bonus, but in terms of premium features and everything like that, it's certainly not up there, in my opinion, compared to the Passport. Now, one of the cool things about the Samsung Galaxy S5 is that it's IP67 rated, so you can actually drop this in water without destroying the phone completely, and it has a good seal for liquids around the back, as you can see over here. And one of the cool things as well, both of these two smartphones have the option to expand their memory. On the BlackBerry side, you just lift up that flap and you have access to a micro SD expansion slot. And there you see I already have one installed in my Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, looking at the displays themselves, you'll notice that the Samsung Galaxy S5 obviously has a larger display because it doesn't have that physical keyboard. Now, obviously, one of the main reasons why anybody would be interested in a phone like the Passport would have to be its physical keys. Now, back a couple of years ago, people were addicted to these things. Now, we obviously have virtual keyboards, which work really well, and there's lots of great third-party keyboards that make typing really easy and quite fast. You just have to get used to the different style. Now, one thing is certainly so, the kind of tactical feedback that you get from a physical keyboard is certainly something that is very nice. And once you get used to the overall kind of feel and design of the overall layout, you can definitely type pretty fast on the Passport. The only gripe I have with it is definitely the width of it. It's a pretty wide keyboard compared to the more traditional narrower keyboards that you'd find in other BlackBerries and the older BlackBerries. So it's a little bit awkward if you're not used to it, but the overall features that you get within the keyboard itself is quite nice, and it's nice to have a physical keyboard sometimes because it's always there. You'll notice that the keyboard itself is not a full-size QWERTY keyboard in terms of it doesn't have a number pad at the top or any of the decimal marks or any other exclamation points or anything like that. And anything extra that you don't see physically will be put on the screen itself. So pretty handy, and the OS is very smart to adapt to those things. Now, moving forward, looking at the displays on these two smartphones, the Samsung Galaxy S5 has a 5.1-inch display versus a 4.5-inch display on the Passport. And in terms of resolution, we have 1920 by 1080 on the S5. It has a PPI of about 432, and this actually has a resolution that is symmetrical because the screen is symmetrically square, 1440 by 1440, and that has a little bit of a larger PPI, higher pixel count, about 453 compared to 432 on the S5. Now, in terms of glass, they both have Corning Gorilla Glass 3, so they're quite durable and quite resistant to your everyday use in terms of keys and other kind of light scratches you would come across. And fairly durable in terms of most drops and things like that, but obviously if you drop them at a significant height, that glass will shatter. Now, in terms of the screen experience, on the BlackBerry Passport side, because it's a square symmetrical screen, pretty much every video that you come across, whether it be film or TV, is going to be in an aspect ratio that's not going to fit properly on that BlackBerry symmetrical screen. You're always going to have bars at the top, at the bottom, even if you rotate it to its landscape setting. Now, thankfully, in terms of image quality, it's fairly good. Really accurate kind of images, nice, vibrant, punchy colors. And the cool thing about the Samsung Galaxy S5, it's using its organic LED technology. It's a Super AMOLED screen, so black levels are extremely well defined, pretty much pitch black with an infinite dynamic contrast ratio and vibrancy that really is not matched by pretty much most smartphones that are out in the market. Samsung is really the king of displays. The only real downside of the GS5 is that it's not using a traditional dot matrix display in terms of its sub-pixel count. It's using a pentile display, which makes it so it can actually run a lower amount of sub-pixels in each pixel. So it actually has a lower sub-pixel count than traditional LCD screens because of its pentile display. But you're really not going to perceive that difference too much on an everyday to-day use. It's still a very sharp and clear display regardless of that technology. Now, internally, both of these two devices are quite similar. They're both using Snapdragon 801 chips, and they're both quad-core processor. The Samsung Galaxy S5 is clocked a little bit higher at 2.5 gigahertz versus the 2.26 gigahertz that the BlackBerry Passport is clocked in at. And in terms of RAM, we have 2 gigabytes of RAM on the Samsung side and 3 gigabytes of RAM on the BlackBerry Passport side. So in terms of multitasking capabilities, I don't think that the Samsung really has any issues with 2 gigs of RAM, but there is certainly an advantage of having more RAM, and something that you're not going to really come across if you're an average day user, but if you're a real heavy multitask user, I think the BlackBerry definitely holds its own when doing a whole bunch of things at the same time. Now, in order to test the performance of the new Samsung Galaxy S5 versus the BlackBerry Passport, let's go ahead and run Geekbench 3 and see what these two can score. So here, as you can see from the results, we have about 2859 on the multi-core score on the S5 and about 2500 on the Passport. And the single core score is not too far off. They're about 100 or so points off each other, but definitely not a bad effort for the Passport. And obviously the Samsung is just a little bit faster in terms of overall performance on the Geekbench benchmark. But overall, you have to consider that this is running its own OS and its own optimization. So this CPU is certainly catered for that OS, and obviously this runs fantastic on the Android platform. So in both cases, I think the phones are fantastic in terms of overall speed and internal specification, and they're really not slow by any means and quite on par with each other in that regard. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is just a quick sound test to try out to see what the internal speakers sound like in an every day-to-day experience. We're just going to play some music on both phones and see how they sound. Now, just reviewing those two clips back, I definitely have to give it to the BlackBerry Passport. A lot better sound out of those small speakers. Now, the Samsung is not bad, but it's typical of most of these smartphones that have such a small speaker behind them. And obviously the placement is all wrong. If you have it on a table, most of that sound is getting ruined anyways, but that's how a lot of people listen to their music or use their speakerphone on a table, on some kind of surface. Even on the hand, that speaker is still going to get disrupted. The placement on the speakers are fantastic on the Passport, and the overall fidelity in terms of mid-range and bass response is excellent. One of the best smartphones you can get right now, in my opinion, that has really decent level of quality sound. Now, in terms of connectivity, both the Samsung Galaxy S5 and the BlackBerry Passport have the latest generation of Wi-Fi connectivity. They both have dual band AC compatibility, as well as the latest generation Bluetooth 4.0, as well as all LTE bands that are available internationally and in North America. They also both have their own standards of NFC transaction capabilities. With the Android phone, obviously you have Google Wallet that you can use, and BlackBerry has their own service where you can upload your credit card and debit card information and make transactions using the internal NFC chips. Now let's talk about some of the special features that each phone has to offer. Now, obviously with the BlackBerry, you have that physical keyboard, which is fantastic. One of the cool things that BlackBerry has done is that you can actually use it to do a couple of different things. If you're looking through your mail or want to browse the web, you can actually scroll using the keyboard itself, which is very innovative, and it works very, very nicely. There's also a couple of gesture things you can do. The screen itself is reliant on gestures for you to get in between apps and to switch between apps running in the background and things like that. And BlackBerry has done an excellent job in the latest generation of 10.3 to really refine their OS and just to make it as fluid and easy to use as possible. And one of the best things about the BlackBerry OS I was a huge fan of is definitely their multitasking features. If you take a look at running apps in the background, I think this is a really, really clever design that is implemented well in the other phones as well, but this is really intuitive and great for beginners. Another cool thing about the Passport is, like a lot of modern day BlackBerries, it has this thing called the BlackBerry Hub, which is basically going to aggregate all your important notifications from BBM or Gmail and missed calls and text messages and a whole bunch of things, and you can list them in priorities. And just a great way to kind of organize all your notifications. It's something that hopefully other OSs will have in the future, but this is something really special that BlackBerry has been offering in their OS. Now, looking at the Samsung Galaxy S5, it has a whole bunch of features. Obviously, we can't go into all of them, but obviously you have gesture control modes where you can basically swipe this screen and turn it on like that without even touching it. It has sensors for that. There has air mode, so you can hover into photos and things like that by just floating on top of the actual screen. There's a fingerprint sensor as well, so you can swipe it to basically unlock your phone and do a couple of things in terms of PayPal transactions, and you use it as your Passport. It's also one of the first phones to have a heart rate monitor, which integrates with this S Health app, which has a pedometer and it monitors your health and day-to-day exercise activity, which is certainly fantastic. It works pretty well, not as well as one that would go on your wristband, but at least it has something there if you don't want to wear a wristband. You can definitely use that heart rate monitor. And obviously one of the big things about these Samsung phones is running the TouchWiz UI from Samsung, so it's a skin on top of Android, and it's obviously not as, I think, as single-minded as the BlackBerry phone, which has a manufacturer that controls the OS. This is obviously being manufactured by Samsung, but then they have to kind of adapt their interface and their strategies to match what Google is trying to do. So you have basically two OSs running simultaneously, but you can root it and get a more pure Android experience. But a lot of people are used to Touch UI, and it's definitely not a bad interface at all. Now, looking at the cameras that comes in both these two smartphones, on the front-facing side, we have both 2 megapixel sensors that can shoot 720p at at 30 frames per second on the Passport side, and 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second on the Samsung side. So a little bit higher resolution in terms of video capturing capabilities on the Samsung side, but pretty similar in terms of image quality overall. But the real interest is going to be obviously on the rear-facing cameras. And starting with the Samsung, we have a fantastic 16 megapixel sensor. It's a pretty large sensor. It also has phase detection, autofocusing, as well as LED flash and stabilization for video mode as well. On the BlackBerry Passport side, we have a 13 megapixel sensor with optical stabilization and LED flash. In terms of the video capturing capabilities, the BlackBerry Passport can record up to 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second, but the Samsung Galaxy S5 can do full 4K capturing capabilities at 30 frames per second. It can also do 720p at 120 frames per second for all your slow motion needs. So let's go ahead and take a look at the image quality between these two cameras. That way you can determine what looks best to you. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall battery life between these two smartphones. Now, in terms of the overall battery size, this BlackBerry Passport has an incredible battery, absolutely monstrous. It's 3450 milliamp hours. It's non-removable, which is unfortunate because on the Samsung side, you can actually take off the back and replace that battery, which is fantastic. And you can just keep a whole bunch of batteries with you if you're on a long trip away from power. But in terms of overall battery life performance, I definitely have to give it to the BlackBerry Passport. This is a real business class phone. You can have this phone running for pretty much 2.5 days if you're really conservative with it. And even if you're really rough in terms of pushing that screen brightness all the way full and watching a lot of multimedia based stuff, you can get a great battery performance out of this, at least a day and a half, if not more. And the overall performance you get on the Samsung Galaxy S5 is definitely not bad. 2800 milliamp hour battery, which definitely can get you up to 21 hours of 3G talk time. So in terms of overall battery performance, obviously the Passport has it over the Samsung Galaxy S5, but the Galaxy S5 does have removable battery, which is a plus side, but I really don't think that's a real big issue on the BlackBerry side. But if you're a real power hungry user, I would definitely have to say that the Passport has it up on this Samsung. But that's really it, guys. If you have any questions about anything I talked about in the video, please make sure to leave that on a comment down below. And make sure to give us a thumbs up and favorite the video. That really helps us out tremendously. Make sure to check out our other comparisons. I've also compared this phone against the iPhone 6 Plus. If you haven't seen that already, check back to our channel. And thank you again for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.